For everyone who is new here, welcome. I'm glad to welcome you into the space, into the database, and kind of show you around. And hopefully it's a good refresher as well for any one of our vets who've been here for quite a long time. There's always something that we can refresh ourselves on or remind ourselves of. And I just hope that it can be helpful. We do have a long training with us ahead, and there aren't too many of us here quite yet, but I'm guessing that you all will have your own hypothetical questions or maybe case scenarios. And if you want to pose them throughout our training, then feel free. For those of you who have been in training with me before, you probably know I like to have discussion throughout. So please interrupt me, please ask me questions. Sometimes by the end of different segments, you forget your question, and I hate that personally. So either you can interrupt me, put yourselves off of mute, and or just post it into the chat. Ruth's going to be helping me throughout to make sure that I don't miss anything, because I know that a lot of the details can be lost in conversation too, and cases can get complicated. So please do all of that. So let me start by sharing my screen, and we should be good to go. Bruce, would you be able to give me permissions?
Yes, give me just a moment and I will sort that out right now.
No problem. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So can you all see my screen? Awesome. So I'm also trying something out new today, Canva, for the first time. So let's see how this goes. All right. So again, for any of you who don't know who I am, my name's Asia. I'm the grant reporting and data coordinator here at the Alliance. My job consists of a whole bunch of different things, but for the purpose of this training, I do everything ETO. So all of the information and data that you put into ETO are things that I filter through, that I look through, that I review, analyze, and put out to whether it be our community partners, back to your member centers, and also, of course, our funders. And the purpose of today's training is really to connect all, to make sure that whatever it is that we're putting into our database, it's of the most quality and substance, so that it is all the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. I used to work at a member center, but I no longer do. So I don't have that same connection with clients that you do. And really that connection is what fuels all of the stories and the meaning behind the numbers. I don't need to convince you that clients are not just numbers. You know that they're far more than that. But for those who don't do this work every single day and aren't in the trenches, like I like to say, they don't have that same kind of relationship to the data. It's not as personal to them. Looking at graphs and charts are very different and feel very different for them than it might be for you all. So it's important to me that we connect on just our basics and how we put information into ETO, so that we're on the same page and that we have the same understanding of when do I fill something out? How do I fill something out? All right, so let's go over a little bit about what I just want you to take away from today. Again, I said just the basics about data collection and data entry. I want to define some key terms for things inside ETO. ETO, our efforts to outcomes database, it has its own lingo, and sometimes things can get interchanged or confusing. So I want to clarify as much as I can as well. And understand the main function of our main touch points. Our touch points are like forms within ETO that allow us to capture categories of information. You're probably familiar. We'll go over our new victim intake, we'll go over demographics forms, and most importantly to our Alliance services forms. What are we doing for our clients? And also I want to go a little bit over how to develop like a data entry workflow, or how to go over your dashboard in a way that, or create a dashboard in a way that works best for you. And that looks different for every member center because you all also input information very differently than one another, but also from an advocate to advocate, how you organize your information could be different. So we'll go over that. Before I start though, I am interested, and please, if you want to, if you can, either put into the chat or you can unmute yourselves. I want to know, what is it that you want to get out of today? We have like a nice little group here. So I want to be able to tailor this training to your needs. Most of you have been here from either a range of about 2 months to several years. So we got a nice spread, but I want to know, what are the things that you want to get out of today's training? And again, if you want to put in chat, you can, or if all of those things sound good, then I'll just keep it moving.
I guess, I'm sorry, I guess clarification on some things. I don't think, I have a pretty good scope of it, but I just think there's some clarification that we need, even on some of the questions, like, I guess we can get into it after, but, I just think some clarification on some questions might be helpful, like what exactly you may be looking for, because I feel like some of the questions, every member center could be answering different. So I don't know if some data you're getting is as accurate or is being, seen as the same way at every member center, I guess is my question.
For sure, for sure.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up and even making note of that, because it's something that we've found many inconsistencies with, how each member center defines, let's just even say counseling, for example, right? So I will definitely go over all of those things.
For me, it would be just like filling it out like efficiently and like correctly. Because though I don't use it as much as the counselors at our member center does, I am on the hotline a lot. So when I do like put the like clients in and everything like that, I want to make sure that it's filled out like efficiently. So I was like, hey, you missed this, or hey, you missed that. I was like, I'm sorry.
All good. It happens all the time to the best of us. But I appreciate that too, because since there are so many touch points, sometimes it can be confusing which ones to start off with, and then some are prerequisites for others. So great questions. And things I'll keep in mind. Other than that, I guess we'll start. So as I said, I don't need to convince you that our clients are not just numbers, but I did want to start today with like a general foundational quote. And it says that data is just a tool for enhancing intuition. And the reason why I chose this quote was because we talk about data all the time, right? Data, buzzwords. And it's really hard sometimes to know if all the work that you're doing to put this information inside ETO actually amounts to anything. I, by no means, I'm doing my best to try to bring meaning back into all of those numbers. You put so much meaning into the work, you put so much meaning into the data and into ETO, but by the time it gets exported out and inside a report or inside some kind of chart or graph, sometimes all of that meaning gets lost. And what I want to do is make sure that all the information we're putting in consistently, constantly is informing the questions that we ask. It's just a tool for the questions that we ask to solve the problems that we're all facing every day. Questions like, how do we end sexual violence? How do we prevent sexual violence? What is it that our clients need? Who are our clients, most importantly, right? Demographics aren't just race, ethnicity, age, gender identity. Literally, how have our clients come to us? What are their stories? And how are we going to create something more for clients, knowing that there are likely one client represents maybe just thousands of others that have not come to our services yet, right? This is an opportunity for us to identify what kind of questions do we need to ask so that we can solve future problems. So I want to start off by looking at this very simple client profile. When I say, can you think of a client that you've worked with, or maybe even just a person that you know between the ages of 25 through 59, maybe has a current or past history of mental health problems. They've shared with you they're an adult who has been sexually assaulted, or maybe they're an adult who has been sexually assaulted as a child. They've had a history of stalking or harassment, maybe by their abuser. They've come to you for housing. They want short-term or long-term counseling, information, referrals. How many of you, show of hands, whether it be emoji hands or your own hands, can think of at least one client that fits this profile, right? I want you to think of that client, or maybe you can think of several clients, maybe several people in your own life, maybe several people you've met when you're doing a training or doing an outreach, something outreach or a tabling. Think of that person and what comes to mind. Maybe it's their voice, right? Maybe you've met them before and you remember what they look like. Can you recall how they felt in the moment, what crisis looked like inside their body? Or maybe you're just wondering, how are they doing now, right? All the feelings and memories and vivid memories that we have of each one of our clients tells a story that no number can tell, right? It far exceeds the graphs and charts that we put out on our reports or write up for our annual reports or even share with our directors or funders. That exactly, those feelings, those real stories, those are the things that we need to remember and hold on to, because that's why we do this work, right? Those are the inspirational stories that keep us going, as hard as they are every single day to confront. That's exactly why we need to do it, because again, that one person that you're thinking of represents so many other people that don't even maybe know who we are, have not come to us yet, maybe feel like they can't, or are not ready yet, or just maybe we're not the right match. And those are all realities for all kinds of people, and that's okay. What we want to do is keep that humanity within those memories, right? So remember these feelings when I ask you to remember a client with this profile, okay? Now, alternatively, I want you to share with me a word or feeling that comes to mind when I show you this. Thoughts?
Well, I wish I knew how to get the one on the top right over there. That'd be kind of nice to have.
Mm-hmm. Maybe, I know for me, definitely different, right? If anything, kind of overwhelming for sure. There's a lot on the screen, but I want us to put ourselves in the perspective of not just as an advocate. You're not an advocate in this very second. Think of yourself as a funder. Think of yourself as a legislator. Think of yourself as some random person on the street that's walking by your table. What do you think? Who do you think of? What do you think of when you see these charts? I imagine, especially for people who don't do this every day, maybe nobody comes to mind. Or you can't really think of anything. It's kind of confusing.
I kind of think it's like meaningless without context. So
Yeah.
maybe it would be very meaningful. Like I think of a research paper and, you know, the numbers would certainly mean something if it had a small abstract or I knew what I was looking at.
Right, exactly. So I want to break this down because it's so important that we have one and the other, right? The former slide that I just shared with you, that's what we would call a lot of our like qualitative information. Loving the cat right now, Sarah. I'm just saying, so cute.
She like jumped in on a meeting earlier with the college consortium, and I just tell people she's like really feminist and like, you know, she's really passionate about the work. So I apologize, but yeah.
No worries, love it. So in our last slide, when I was asking you to just like feel all of those emotions, right? Remember all of the people that profile reminded you of. That's all our qualitative information, our information that cannot be put into numbers because we feel it, we experience it. Those are people's entire stories. This is a little bit different. This is what is more so our quantitative information, the information that we put into this database that can be translated into numbers. And they both say and tell us very important things, but they also do so in very different ways. And each one of these ways can't really be as strong as it possibly can be without the other. So what I want to show you on this top left-hand corner, it's what we call a timeline, right? Like our time graph. And this is actually tracking how many clients, like this is real. So there's not made up numbers, like these are our actual numbers. Starting from Q1 of our fiscal year 2019 to 2020, all the way to our most recently finished fiscal year, so our 2020 to 2021 fiscal year, ending in June 30th of this year. So what we can see are a distribution of literally all of our whole entire coalition, from our attorneys at VRCCT to our post-conviction team to all 9 member centers. This is a distribution of a number of all of the clients that you have all served across this period of time. And when we started off in July of 2019, most people were at the peak of the number of clients that they had served. Really, before this, it's pretty much the same. It's pretty level. But in comparison, in this chart, it's the peak of how many clients we've been serving. And over time, what we notice is that it goes a little bit up and down. Most member centers are pretty consistent here in the next 2 quarters, but then bam, Q4 of 2019 to 2020, also Q1 2020 to 2021. So to give you a little bit more context, Q4 of fiscal year 2019 to 2020 is January of 2020. All right. Who can tell me what happened between January, February, and March of 2020? COVID.
COVID.
Bam, boom. And we saw it, right? We saw our numbers plummet and continue to plummet into the next several quarters. And when you just look at this, let's just say we didn't even have these time dates down here. It's pretty obvious that something has happened, that most member centers numbers have dropped significantly just in that period of time. But something I will say, despite that, and we already know all the reasons why that happened, what I would like to recognize is that even though everybody has been struggling to figure out how do we provide services to clients throughout this pandemic, what you'll notice is that gradually, slowly, but surely, almost every single member center, including our 2 programs here, have managed to increase over time the amount of clients that they've been serving. Some, we can say, let's just look at BRCCT, our attorneys, for example, have even surpassed. They ended this quarter at 99 clients served, started 2019 Q1 with 64, even managed to surpass the amount of clients that they even started with. And that goes for many of you. So even though we're not really even close to what we used to be doing, we're still growing and we're still recovering and we're still managing to figure out how do we reach out to clients during these times and how do we maintain the clients that we have during these times. So context, as Sarah was saying too, it's so important to figuring out how we understand this information and what do we do with it moving forward too. So I'm really excited to see, starting this new fiscal year, what our numbers continue to look like. We're going to be ending our first quarter very soon. So you'll continue to see this kind of information. And like some of you said too, it'd be really helpful to be able to consistently see this information. So even just for your own member centers. And that's something that I plan to do and come back to you all to figure out how we arrange just time to talk about what is your center doing and what are your strengths. So here, what we're looking at, our bottom left-hand corner, is the age breakdown of who it is that we're serving. This is just another bar graph. And not too surprisingly, the largest group of people that we're serving is between the ages of 25 and 59. That's partly the reason why I put that in the previous slide that you saw before, because most of the clients that you're serving are within that age range. As many of you know, part of our goals for this new fiscal year are to work more with young people. So in whatever way that happens, we hope to see these numbers increase. And again, this is for the entire coalition. Right? Up here, what we're seeing is our race and ethnicity data. And so this is just like a nice visual representation of, again, who it is that we're serving. Majority of the clients that we're serving identify as Caucasian. Second behind that, they identify as Latinx. We're not going to count the undisclosed here, but it's like third behind that, folks are identifying as African American or Black. All right, so as we again continue to figure out who it is that we're conducting outreach with, what communities do we need and want to serve, this is just a current snapshot of who it is that we are serving. Again, for our most recent fiscal year. And then lastly, this is an interesting one that I want to point out. In our bottom left-hand corner, what we see is a graph of individual counseling numbers. So this is the number of people whom have received individual counseling by each one of our member centers. So if we compare these two side by side, it's actually really interesting because we have so many more just clients that we're serving here, but yet some of the lowest numbers for the number of people actually getting counseling. You go back to the end of this graph over here and look at the most recent quarter from our last fiscal year, and you see that we have some of the highest numbers now of counseling. And again, individually, if you just look at this, you're like, wow, there was a huge spike here at the beginning of the pandemic, and then we kind of dropped off and we're growing back up again. But side by side, that tells it also something completely different that we want to also be able to look into. So all to say that all of this information is information that you have all put into this system. And without your help doing that, I wouldn't be able to tell you any of this information, never mind anybody else. You know it on a day-to-day and very personal basis because you're working directly with clients. But this paints an even bigger picture, a bigger picture about who we're serving, how we're serving them, where we're serving them, but also just what is happening in the state of Connecticut and how can we relay to other people, how can we convince other people that it's something that that they should be caring about. We already do, but how do we convince others? And it's with things like this, with the stories that you recall from the last slide, right? So putting that together is just a really powerful way to be able to do those things. So into potentially, I guess we can call the nitty gritty. These are what I call our core ETO touch points. These are the touch points that gather everything that you just saw. All the graphs, all the charts, that's from basically just these 3 touch points. What you have is your demographics. You already know what that is. It's the who of our clients. Our new victim intake, this gathers what happened to them. And then we have our alliance services. How did we help them? What services were we able to provide them or link them to or refer them to? What did they need? Some of you have more or less touch points. So some of you should all actually be able to fill out this vocal legal services touch point. So this is for any clients who you are referring out to legal service, any kind of legal service. You have a case note section. This is really just for you personally. I don't know if all member centers use this, but it is an option for you to just kind of organize yourselves and keep case notes related to each client all in one place. And then some of you have a support groups option. So I know that not everybody here is an advocate that does direct service, but if you are, or even beside that, you facilitate support groups, then this is a way for you to track information. How many people are attending your support group? What was it about? How long was the support group? Did you have sessions or was it just one? Just different ways for us to organize information. What I'm going to be talking about today are just these three, because even within themselves, there's a lot of information. So if you do have any questions moving forward, though, about any of these other ones or any other touch points that you see, we can always arrange something afterwards and you can just shoot me an email. All right. All right. So where it all begins, right? Data collection. These are all of the ways in which you gather that information. So can you tell me, how do you even get the information to put into ETO? Where do you get that from? Being on the hotline, right? Yeah, hotline. Counseling sessions, right? Support groups.
Accompaniments.
Accompaniments for sure. Where else?
Education disclosures.
Education disclosures. If you're out doing a training somewhere, if you're doing a tabling, you can also gather information from your social media, right? You can gather information from just walk-ins that come in. We also have, and I hope that you have all recently seen, a copy of our new client feedback survey, right? That's a whole bunch of data as well from the exact opposite side. This is all information that you're putting into ETO, but our client feedback survey is directly from them. It's a reflection of what their experiences was like with us. And that's also extremely important to collect. So all to say, we're getting information from all kinds of places, right? And the key to having really good quality data is to start from the very beginning when we're collecting all of that information. So this is an example of where we would start, your ETO dashboard. What I would like to share with you is that you all have now the ability to arrange your dashboard. So when you log in, this is the first thing that you see. And being able to organize this space for you is really helpful, I hope, in being able to create a nice workflow for yourselves. So as you can see, there are different boxes here on your dashboard, and you can arrange them differently, you can label them differently, but once you have information inside each one of them, you'll see all of your touch points that you've most recently done. And it's just a nice way for yourself as an advocate to review all the work that you've done over the course of a period. You can limit yourself to see the most recent 10, or you can limit yourself to see the most recent 100. It's really up to you and how you want to organize and visualize this dashboard. Let's see, sorry. But the first step into collecting all of this data is making sure that we are asking ourselves and keeping in mind all the questions that we know we need to be asking, not only of ourselves, but our clients, right? These two screens. So something that I have for you that can hopefully be helpful is this intake checklist. So some advice that I have is that whenever you're talking to a client, whether it be on the hotline, be in an accompaniment, in person, on the phone, at a tabling, in a training. These are all the things that you want to keep in mind. And the more accessible that these checkpoints are to you, the more naturally they'll come to you, the more automatic they'll be for you when you're asking folks these questions. And I will say most of the time, clients will disclose all of this information themselves, and you don't have to ask anything specifically, right? And so whether it be you create a checklist on your phone, something that I've done in the past when I am on the hotline is create like a Google spreadsheet. So put all of these different data points on a spreadsheet so that when a person calls you, you have it on your phone already and you can make notes right there, whether it be on your phone itself, if you have your work phone, or pencil and paper. What we also used to do was just carry around notebooks all the time so that no matter what situation you were in, you always had something to write on, to carry there, to write down that information. I've seen people put down these check boxes and data points on sticky notes and just stick them all over their monitors or their laptops. Again, just so you know, you're not missing anything. For other people though, they have things like this. Some member centers have very specific forms. We call them intake forms. We call them, some of you call it a shift report form. Some of you call it just like a regular intake form. Whatever you call it, it's just a way for us to organize ourselves in our minds to make sure that when we are having that initial contact with that person, that we're gathering everything that we need. Because you very well know that that might be the last time we ever talk to that person, right? It might be that they call the hotline and they never call us back. They don't want follow-up services. So we don't have an opportunity to get that information later. But what you'll notice with this client intake form, and I can also share this with you, if you like it, then just send me an email and I can forward it to you. But this is basically a carbon copy of the demographic form, touch point, and the new victim intake touch point. So what you'll see here is this section of demographics. This mimics all the things that you're going to see inside ETO. So if you have this with you when you're on that call or when you're in session or when you're interacting with that client, then you know all of the information that you need to take down. Not all of it is required. A lot of it is, but not all of it. So please keep that in mind too. But you also have this victim intake section. So this is for if you are on an accompaniment, then all of that stuff is ready for you to fill out. The last thing that you want to do when you're helping somebody through crisis is remember all the data points that you have to get, right? You're focused on that person, their feelings, what they need, how to de-escalate the crisis. So the more available and again, accessible all of these data points are to you, the less that you have to think about it and the more that you can focus on that person and what they need. This is kind of just like in the back of your mind, back burner, kind of like writing as you go. So whatever it looks like to you, again, if it's simple sticky notes and that works for you, I encourage it. If it's something more formal and drawn out like this, I encourage it too, whatever works for you. But then you have the actual input, right? So what does it look like to take all of those data points that you've just written down somewhere and put it inside ETO? First step, above all else, and hopefully this speaks to your workflow question, Danielle. When you are inside ETO, the first thing that you want to do is make sure that whoever you're putting into the system, they're not already there. Because the last thing that you want to do is duplicate a client or do a whole bunch of work that you did not need to do. So first step is finding the victim. So when you pull up your ETO dashboard, you go to this left-hand menu bar, you're going to click Find Victim and try to figure out if that person is in there or not. And if so, then you can add a new touch point for that person. But if not, then you already know we're going to just be adding a new victim. So when you do add a new victim, this is the first thing that's going to come up, our demographic section. Demographics is its own separate touch point. So when we are putting in a new client, what it's going to be asking us is to automatically, it enrolls them in your specific program. Sorry. And it's going to ask you for a program start date. And please do not put the date that you are filling it out unless it is the exact date that you talk to that person. What we're talking about is the first date of contact. Okay. And some of you have, some of your organizations, some of your member centers have their own mechanism for a case number. Some of you let ETO design your own case number, that's fine. Some of you have your own system. So whatever that looks like for you, continue to do that. The required question here is like, is this a new victim intake? And it might feel redundant to check off yes or no, but it is very important for me because sometimes people do put duplicates. Sometimes people are putting in the same client in, and they just don't realize it. So that's just for me. So don't worry too much about it. The type of service, that drop down is really just asking, was this person serviced in the past at any point? Sometimes people are from different member centers and they come to your member center for the first time. You can indicate that there. But what we really want to make sure is that we have the name of the individual in town. So believe it or not too, like there are very specific reports that ask us like what town are all of our clients coming from and literally how many, what kind of victimization types do they have, like very specific things. So if you can get the town of which they're from, please do. But all of these other things, again, self-explanatory. Age and victimization is one that I do want to highlight because while age itself, date of birth, meaning the age at which we're talking to them, is important and required, the age of victimization is something I've noticed that not a lot of people fill out, right? And that's for lots of reasons. Maybe we just don't know the age of victimization. And what we're talking about here is the age at victimization the first time somebody was victimized. So let's just say, for example, you're talking to an adult and they say that they were recently assaulted, but also that they have a history of sexual violence. And maybe the first time that they were assaulted was when they were a teenager, they were 16. That's the age that you're going to want to also put into here, because what that tells us is that, one, people are experiencing multiple victimizations throughout their lifetime, but two, that there's a time period by which people experience victimization and then people come to us for services. And that, again, it could be for lots of reasons, but we want to know, what does that time frame look like? And when are people experiencing sexual violence for the first time in their lives?
I actually have a question on that in terms of secondary victims, because we have had this question come up in our office a lot. And one thing I typically do, so if a parent, if a child discloses an assault and it happened 4 years ago, is the age of victimization for the secondary victim, obviously for, say they're 50, would it be that 40, whatever, 46 for them technically? Or would you rather us leave that blank?
I would rather you leave that blank because this is for our reflection of our primaries. Unless they themselves have been victimized at some point in their lives, then we're talking about them. But then they...
Because that can just get confusing just because, you know, I don't know if, again, I don't know if all member centers know that's only for primary victims, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. And I thank you for bringing that up because my intent for this touch point is to make sure that we're recording it for the primary.
So I mean, it might be nice to do like, if primary, you know, age, you know, just so people know.
Good suggestion. And I can definitely put that in there. That makes sense. All right. So as far as race goes, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We have all the race categories, but we also have undisclosed, not tracked. Please do not feel pressure to fill in something. I'd much rather you put undisclosed or not tracked than make something up, right? It doesn't matter to me who it is. Well, let me say this very broadly. It matters to me, of course, who it all is serving. I just want to make sure that all of the data in here is accurate, right? All right. So, oh, well, let me ask you, does anybody have any more questions about this first page of demographic questions? No? All right. So moving on to our second page of demographic questions, something I also want to point out to you is that in this primary language dropdown, we have many languages listed. And it's something I've noticed going through all the reports that very few people fill out. And maybe it's because you don't know, but I do encourage you to, if you do know that information, please fill it out, because then, like anything else, if we have trends in one area or one language and we see that most people are speaking Polish, because we have a lot of Polish speakers, especially in our New Britain area, then maybe it's something that we can advocate for more funding for. That's just one example, right? So I put a little, I guess, note here for you all. And this is to say that in this disability section, what we'll be adding is developmental disability very soon. Actually, one of you all, an advocate from one of our member centers had reached out to me and said, Asia, something I've noticed is that within this disability section, we don't have a section for developmental disabilities, because that's very different than an intellectual disability. And I want to make sure that we're capturing more accurately maybe what our clients are experiencing. And I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we talked it through, and we're going to be developing very specific language for you all to know when to fill out developmental disability versus intellectual disability, but something just to look out for, right? And with that said, if there are things like that you notice as we're going through this, even just in your day-to-day work, that you're like, hey, Asia, I think it'd be really interesting if we were to capture information about this specific group, then let's talk it out. Because as much as I also don't, want to create more work for you to put into ETO, all of that's important, right? And one person is, as I'll keep saying, representative of probably many more that don't come see us, but doesn't mean that it's not important to capture. So keeping going through, most of this is, again, pretty self-explanatory. We did change this section recently to be expand a little bit more. I think previously it only used to include checkpoints or a drop down actually for lesbian, gay, transgender, or other. So again, we worked with a couple of folks to make sure that we expanded this section so that we would be a little bit more inclusive of who our clients are and how they identify. Any questions on this section?
On the section where it says, did this victim report more than one victimization? Would that be like if they also broke their arm or something?
I was just gonna, yeah, I was right behind that.
That's you.
Very good question. So what we're interested in when we ask this question, and maybe I can also make a note to be more specific about that, is did this victim report more than one type of sexual victimization?
So same perpetrator, different perpetrator, childhood.
It doesn't matter. Any kind of sexual violence history that they have, if it has happened to them more than once, whether it be by the same person or a different person in childhood, in adulthood, I want you to click yes. If this is
okay, so what if it's like within, Kayla, help me out. I'm trying to ask, what if it's within the same period of time? So is that just considered yes? If it's just within say one disclosure, I don't know, multiple multiple reports of assault, maybe throughout a week span or 2 week span of the same perpetrator. Okay.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes. Good question. So I will make that specification on here then. Did this victim report more than one instance of sexual victimization? And I'll get to like if they've been burglarized before, if they've been a victim of another kind of crime soon, because we also want to capture that. So when you are done filling out this demographics section, what it allows you to do is attach any other new touch points to this person. So this demographics section is like the core of any person's profile. And let's just say somebody accidentally creates a duplicate of this person. What will happen is that we will have to merge the two. And that's a very easy process, but what we want to make sure is that every single data point in this touch point is accurate, because whatever we make the, I think they call it like the mother profile, the main profile, it will erase whatever is in the demographic section of that other profile. It will merge all the touch points from both, but it will erase demographics from whatever we make like the secondary profile. So make sure that just whatever demographics you're putting in, you want to just decipher which one you want to keep. All right. So that's it for demographics. What we're going to move into now is the new victim intake. And so the reason why I'm even following this order is because this is how I recommend you to fill out clients in ETO. So start with your demographics, then go into your new victim intake. So when you do a new victim intake, you can fill it out in multiple ways. You can go inside this left-hand touch bar in the menu bar to record a new touch point. That's one way. Second way is to just be on your dashboard and you can record a new touch point here. Third way is that once you start building up clients and putting people into ETO, this will populate and it'll give you an option to record a new intake. So what we want to do, first steps first, is when we actually want to record that new touch point, where we're going to what it's going to ask us is to select our subject type. Every single time you're going to be choosing a participant because the client is put into ETO as a participant, kind of like data file. And what it will do is then populate all the participants inside your organization. I just have a fake one here just so that I don't go into people's get any confidential information. Again, this training is being recorded, so I just didn't want to put any information out there. But once you find that participant that you just put the demographics in for, what you're going to do is check mark it and then continue. So when you hit continue, then it will populate this new victim intake touch point for you. And this is the first section. So like you filled out before, what you're going to do for this date is put in the date of the first contact, like you did for the demographics, and start filling out this information. This is again, a fake profile that I just made under the WISE profile. And what it's going to be asking you for is your victim type. So that's when it's asking you, is this a primary? Is this a secondary? Is this a tertiary? Or for our PCVS folks, is this an offender? Now, to be clear, I know that probably many of you already know this, but when we're talking about types of victims, a primary is the person whom the assault happened to. Right? This is the actual client that you're working with, right? A secondary is defined as any family member, friend, support network that person has that is seeking information or support from you. So let's just say you are working with a family. The child is the primary victim, and we can call the parents, siblings, cousins, whomever, that is also seeking support are secondary victims, okay? or friends. We can call them secondary victims. They have a direct relationship to your primary. When we're talking about tertiary victims, that is defined as any service provider, teacher, medical professional, anybody who has a professional relationship with the primary. Does that make sense? Okay, just want to make sure too, because I know that sometimes tertiary and secondary are used interchangeably, and I just want to be very clear about that. For our pre-CVS folks who are working with our probation and parole, your other option is pretty clear for you, for offenders. So then we move into the victim relationship to the primary. In this dropdown, you have options for self. So if you are already filling this out for a primary, you're going to be in this section say the victim's relationship to the primary is themselves. Anybody else, there are different options that you have. You have parents, you have other household members, you have friends, acquaintances, stranger, other. And if other, please indicate this. But something I do encourage is to make sure that you do read all the options, because I am going to look into this data point every single time and make sure that we track any new trends for any new kinds of relationships that aren't indicated in this list. And sometimes I do get repeats of whatever's in this list. I think it's probably just because people either just read over it, don't see it, but make sure that you do read it so that it counts and that we're not getting duplicates over here. So then we move into, was a police report filed? And when we're talking about this, I want to be clear too, that that doesn't necessarily mean like right there and then. What we're talking about is, was a police report filed for an instance of that person's sexual violence at any point, right? Because maybe they're coming back to us after many years and want more information just to go through that process. Maybe they tried filing and they didn't want to go through with trial at the time, but maybe they're still within their statute of limitations and they're revisiting. So that's just information we want to make sure that we have. Just because that person has not gone on a police accompaniment with the advocate that's filling this out doesn't mean that it hasn't happened before. So that's information we want to know. As far as mandatory reports are concerned, these are your standard mandatory reports, your DCF reports, your DSS reports. We just want to make sure that we're counting everything. What we also want to make sure is that if we are working with a child, that we make sure that this is filled out, right? I know that's mandatory for any minor that we're working with, but sometimes I do go back and see that a DCF, this checkbox does not say yes, yet in their notes or somewhere else it indicates that they did reach out to DCF, and I don't want to, that means there's like inconsistency. So we just want to be thorough with the entire intake. Assailant relationship, self-explanatory, I think. Sometimes people don't know. Again, it is okay if they don't know, because that is still an option within the dropdown. Now, initial form of contact. This is actually really important information that a lot of our funders like to ask us. And so I would just want to make sure that you pay attention to and gather information about, did they just walk into the office? Did you meet them at a tabling? And make that consistent with whatever, we'll go over it soon, but make that consistent with whatever service you provided. So if the initial form of contact was hotline, I expect that in your Alliance Services touch point, you're going to say that the service delivery type was hotline. I at least need to see that reflected somewhere, because for every single person, we need one Alliance service recorded, right? And if that's how you first got into contact, then I need to see that within the Alliance service. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Now, these are categories that we added, maybe I think it was probably last year, so they're fairly new. But this is, again, to reflect all the information that we over time realized that we were not collecting. So especially since we got the new position here for our justice involved advocate, what we wanted to make sure was that we were capturing if we were working with clients who had made a PREA report. So the PREA reports are something that the prisons themselves are required to act upon when they hear of an instance of sexual violence, but it's not a mandatory report for us. So what we want to know is, even if we're working with somebody who is incarcerated that has experienced sexual violence, it doesn't mean that they've made a PREA report, but we do want to know if they've made a PREA report. Then we want to know, is this person that we're working with, that who is justice involved, also important information for us to capture. And then if it has happened in a facility, which one? We have the similar questions for if assaults have happened within college institutions. I'm working with Bridget to be able to add more data, touch points, and questions to this. So if they've even made a Title IX report, if they have an advocate at their campus that they're working with, things like that. This is just another required question. Identified as a trafficking victim. It's pretty straightforward. Yes, no, maybe, or unsure, sorry. But what I want to kind of point to over here is that this section and following, so your primary victim assault classifications, your subtypes, and your additional types are, again, very, very important pieces of data that we collect. So for your primary victim assault classification, these 3 data points, even though are the only, unless you are part of VRCCT, you're an attorney for our legal team, please do not fill out any other one of these things, okay? Only focus on adult sexually assaulted as a child, and child sexually assaulted. And please also keep in mind that who you're filling out this touch point for and what their victimization type is. So I have noticed that many, many, many advocates are putting in this touch point for adults and say they are a child who has been sexually assaulted. And while I understand why that you might all be doing that, what I really want to clarify for you is that if you are working with an adult and they are coming to you and they've said that they've been sexually assaulted as an adult, please put adult sexually assaulted. If they've said that they have experienced child sexual assault, please put that they are an adult currently who was sexually assaulted as a child. Because what happens is when we're pulling data for CSA, what the implication is that for any person who's checkboxed this off, it's because they're a child, right? So if we're saying, I want to know how many CSA disclosures we got within the past quarter, what I'm going to do is also counting all the adults who've experienced CSA. While of course that counts in its own regard, where I want to see those numbers is here, not here. Okay, so I want to be clear about that. So again, if you're an adult who says they have a history of CSA, put that here, not here. Only if you're working with a child or a minor, please put this. All right. So then assault classification subtypes, it's kind of strange again that this is even the list that we have, but this is only because this is the exact list that we're using for reporting. But again, only be filling out these top few, and if it says VRCCT only, do not fill it out unless. But something I've noticed that, especially for folks who've indicated, and you can check box multiple things. So they could have experienced all of these things or one of these things. It doesn't matter. But let's just say you do put in sexual harassment. Make sure that if you check that off, you are also checking it off over here. Please be, again, this is where like the thoroughness and the consistency of the data input is really important, because sometimes I'll be pulling from this number or sometimes I'll be pulling from this number. And if they're not consistent with one another, that's confusing, right? And then I have to dig through and figure out data and go from there, ask you to fix it, all those things. So just keep those things in mind. Now, somebody asked before for did this person report more than one victimization type? Does it count if somebody broke their arm? This is where I'm going to be counting all of that information, not in the previous touch point. So these are all victimization types for the most part that don't have, that aren't basically one of these. Person has experienced domestic violence, please put domestic violence. But if that domestic violence also included physical assault, please put and include physical assault. I want to paint the most detailed picture as possible for every single one of our clients. So do not be afraid to click as many things that apply to this person. Same as like I said before, please also just read through all of the options, because in this section, I also see folks repeat things that are up here. And sometimes they put a little description of what happened. Let's just say it was child pornography that we're talking about. They'll say child pornography and the type of pornography or where they found it here. While that's important information for me to know, please, if you're going to do that, put that in the note section. Don't repeat it in the type of victimization or additional type of victimization section here. Sorry, any questions on this? No, okay. So then we have our alliance services. How did we help these people? Same process as before. So when we're filling out this touch point, we're always going to be filling it out for a participant type, searching for the client, continuing. This is how we fill it out. So same thing. When did this service happen? It's not necessarily, the first one should always be on the first date of contact, but anyone after that, please make sure that you fill it out on the day that you completed that service, whether it be a week later, 3 months later, a year later, doesn't matter. And this is where I noted before, for service delivery method, at least again, for your first initial contact, make sure that this is consistent with whatever you put inside your new victim intake, right? So if that first contact was via hotline or Spanish hotline, whatever it be, make sure that that's the exact same thing that you put here. Then we go into victim comp. We all know that we should be sharing if it is appropriate, but for the most part, we should all be sharing victim comp or victim compensation information with this person, with whoever it is that we're talking to. So make sure that you fill that out. Sometimes ETO is strange, and even if you don't fill out required questions, it'll allow you to conform, and that's like not helpful to me, but it happens. So just be mindful of where things are included or necessary. For all of these other services though, please, again, do not be afraid to click as many things as possible that are true to the service that you're providing. So if in your first session following the hotline call that you initially had with this person, if you're providing information about criminal justice, the criminal justice process, and you're also doing a counseling session, and you're providing safety planning for that person, and you're also finding them emergency housing, like all of that should be included. And you want to include all of that because one, it shows the work that you're doing. You're not doing it for nothing, but also shows what people need. So if you're as thorough as possible, include those details that we're doing and people need. Now, somebody asked about clarification before on even like the definition of counseling, right? And so when we are every single, I guess it's fair to say that every single member center has a very different definition of what counseling is. Some have clinicians, some of you have MSWs, and some of you are advocates that have gone in just through CAT class training. All of that is okay. I think when we're talking about counseling, what we're talking about is any one of those counseling, short-term counseling sessions that we're having. So if a person has case management, please also include that because that's an option over here, general case management. But all of it counts as our counseling because in those moments, we're also providing emotional support. And when you are providing emotional support, that's kind of like the natural environment that takes place, right? So almost all of a lot of our Alliance services are counseling. But if a person has called us through the hotline, not only again are we putting that as the initial contact, we're also putting it as a service delivery method, and we're saying that it's the type of emotional support and safety services. So we're making sure that we're crossing all of our T's, dotting all our I's, and making sure that that's consistent across the board. Any questions?
I guess I don't have a question. I think I have more of a comment. So when we're inputting additional client contacts, like other than just the initial, I don't know. So the victim compensation question, like obviously that comes up every single time. Is there a way, and obviously it may be no, but is there a way to do without that when we continue to put touch points in? Because like I just feel like that's so redundant.
That makes sense, actually.
It may be no. I'm just saying these are things. I'm just naming things I notice when I'm doing all the staff. So it's like, and Kayla, feel free to chime in because I know you're doing it too. So
actually, it's a good question because I'm thinking that there are points in which we have not provided that information yet. And then there will be maybe 2 or 3 more services that we provide. And then it's more appropriate for us to be sharing that information or actually going through an application. So maybe what we can add to this section, as redundant as it is has already completed or like has completed in the past.
yeah, because I feel like sometimes, like obviously we go to a hospital call, we get a hotline call, like obviously that information is being given. That's a given, but like I don't know, for every touch point we put in for a client who makes, or for a counselor or advocate that makes a phone call, like we have to answer that question, which sometimes, yeah, it might be done within a session, but for every client touch point, like, I don't know.
That's a excellent point. And maybe it's more appropriate to live on the new victim intake then.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea on the victim intake, because that's typically where we see it the most is our first or second interactions with the client is where we provide that info about OVS compensation, or maybe otherwise it can be like a multiple choice elsewhere, just maybe not the mandatory one outside of intake.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. And I appreciate that feedback too, because I'm sure that it gets tedious, as this is all tedious already. So to decrease that, I hope be helpful. Anything else on this? All right. So the last section of the Alliance Services Touchpoint is just talking about criminal justice CJ stuff. Typically our post-conviction team are the ones that fill this out the most, but I do definitely see this happen across our member centers too. So whatever that includes, make sure to indicate that here as well. And as far as time spent, I also want to know that, and it's not because I'm trying to compare who's spending more time with their clients or how much time you're doing in counseling, but I want to be reflective of how much time is spent doing certain things. So if we know that the majority of your time as advocates is being taken up to do counseling, that says something very important, and that more resources then need to be put towards supporting you all to provide counseling. If instead we're seeing that a lot of time is being put to, let's just say, answer hotline calls, does that mean then we need more volunteers, like to help, so, balance that kind of workload? This is just like a overall more like operational kind of data point that we have to just show how much time is being spent typically in certain areas. And of course, it changes from client to client, but it's nice to get like an aggregate.
I also have a question on that. I know I have a million questions, so sorry.
Oh,
So obviously for our center, we have a New London office. We have advocates that go and counsel down in New London. So obviously they would put case-related travel. However, are we including, or do you want the additional? So that's an hour from, Willimantic. So do we add those units of service, or do you number session would go from a half if we're taking 3 or 4 units of service to get to New London? Is that considered?
So what I'm focusing on here for the purposes of this touch point is just how much time we're spending working with the client. So I would say do not include the time of travel. However, if we find, or if your center specifically thinks that it's important to make note of that time you're spending traveling, I think that is definitely something that we can base off of this. So let's just say we're running a report and we want to know how much time is being spent on working with clients who have this specific checkbox checked off. What we can do is run that report. We can say you served 10 clients who needed this service. What we can imply then from those 10 clients is that there were at least 2 hours of driving time associated with that. Right.
Okay.
It's like a secondary kind of inference from that information instead of lumping it into the actual time that's spent with the client. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that answers my question.
Okay, cool. Okay, and so then when we finish all of those things, that's the workflow that we're talking about. We're talking about demographics, new victim intake, and every single service thereafter. And so when you fill out all of those things, they'll all populate your dashboard. Most of you, I believe, are using the CAESV participant dashboard. So it's going to show you your most recent touch points. It's going to show you the new victim intakes. It's going to show you any touch point that you've been filling out most recently. But for each client themselves, they also have their own touch point or their own dashboard. So all of that is laid out differently too. And depending again on what your workflow is, how you like to see the information, you can arrange your dashboard. And something that Ruth was able to help me out with was put a link or a copy of me, I guess, providing like a tutorial on how to change your dashboard on our client portal. So on our Alliance website, we have our advocate portal. And if you enter into that portal, you can look at all the video tutorials that I have shared with you all. Member Center portal, sorry, yes. And then you can find that there. So all to say, it looks different for everybody, but if you do have trouble changing it around, or you want some, want me to walk you through it, then you can also just ask me and let me know. Just very general, like I have no epiphanies that I've come to. I have no magic, like secret sauce to all of this. It's pretty straightforward, but it is tedious. And where I can help or try to provide some kind of structure organization to it, this is what I have. But some tips and tricks that I found is that the sooner, the better. So the sooner that you log in your information into ETO, the better, because you're it's just fresh in your head and in your mind. And I understand that for some of you, you have one person filling out ETO data for everybody. For others, you have every single advocate is filling out their own ETO data, or whatever call you get, that's what you're filling it in. However you fill that in at your member center, the best thing to do is fill it in as quickly as possible. Something that I've known too is that for all of you who heavily rely on volunteers because they're amazing and they help us out so much, though sometimes they forget to leave information too. So just calling them back as soon as possible is something that I would recommend, because again, then it's fresh in their mind and then you get that information from them that you need. Some common practices that I've seen across the coalition is to have designated ETO days. Yay, fun. But just to make sure that you keep in your schedule and allot time so that you can stay on top of all that work. I know that it's tedious and it's not the most exciting thing, but especially on Fridays when like you've had a long week, you've been very busy. Sometimes it's just nice to like have that quiet time to end the week and designate a day for you to fill in all the information from the week that you've just completed. Organizing your dashboard is a way then too to make sure that you're logging all of that information and it is visible to you so that you don't have to either go back into your calendars and check all your appointments and log things that way, because that can be tedious. It's all there right in front of you. A monthly review is something that I also recommend. So after every month, sometimes it's good to just go through the clients that you have and go through like their demographics, go through their new victim intake. Maybe you did do that. Maybe you did provide a new service and then it like resparks your memory and you want to fill something else out, or you found that they've moved, so you want to change their address, things like that. Make sure that you're just kind of keeping on top as much as you can of that information, because at any point in time, I could run a report and it is a live report. So it is exactly a reflection of what is in the database at that time. If significant changes have been made and they haven't been put into the database, I won't have any clue. And so information that I might be pulling for a random report somewhere else might not actually be accurate to what's going on. And I just want to make sure that I'm being truthful to what it is that's happening. As I said before, update your clients' information as you need it, and just like practice, right? You have plenty of opportunities to be putting in client information for other people. Maybe you know that another advocate is like super overwhelmed, super overloaded. And if this is possible, I know that again, it works differently at every member center, but if you want more practice, maybe you can help them out putting clients into ETO and just logging things. The more you do it, the more familiar too that you become with all of the data points that you know that you need to fill out, and then it becomes more natural when you're asking questions.
Hey, Asia, I have a question. Can we see, and I or you, I and Jasenia can go over this more later if it's yes, and if it's no, that's okay. But can we see or generate a report based on what the staff is doing? So for example, and this may have even been resolved. I never followed up with it with Jess, but like one of our staff members wanted to know all of the hours
Yeah.
counseling, for example, because she's just going through her testing for her licensing. And so even just me personally, right? Maybe I just want to see in a year how many hours I've spent on counseling, or how many hours I spent on this or that. So from the staff point of view, can we see what each and generate reports based on what each staff member is doing?
Or at least Kayla or I, who are considered program managers.
Right, exactly. So depending on your level, so if you're a program manager in ETO, you actually already have access to be able to do that. So when we can go over it, or I can send you an email for follow-up, but actually
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
inside the ETO, what you can do is run a report for every entity in ETO. And since all staff members are put in as an entity, what you can do is say for person A, staff person A, what are all the touch points that they filled out within this specific period of time? and it will tell you like how much time that they've spent in the ETO filling out that touch point, but also what's inside that touch point. And I can, again, I'll
Yeah.
and do some follow-up and
Yeah, I would love that. I feel like I spent like an hour, like when we were talking about this, just like playing with like each thing. Like,
We've tried. We have tried to
to
get
know that
it.
it's possible. Yeah, it's great to know it's possible, and so we would love to follow up with you about that later. About
Also,
doing
too,
something.
Asia, I have a kind of a theoretical, like a kind of like a theoretical question. I don't know if this is even possible, but one thing that Kayla and I have talked about in the past is we see, because we both do the stats in our office. So is there a way that, so when you put in a new touch point for service, say we have one of our advocates here has 7 entries for counseling and it's all the same information. Is there a way that we can add multiple dates to an entry? Like, I don't, again, this might be like not even possible, but Kayla and I have thrown the idea around before.
So let's just say you have 7 counseling sessions. Can you write one counseling session with multiple dates?
Correct.
I'm not sure. So I would have to look into it. But I get why, because it can be redundant. A part of me feels like it is more accurate to be filling out separate ones for each time, just because we don't have much certainty that you're spending like the same exact amount of time in each session or going over the same information in each session.
Okay.
But let's workshop through it, because it's a
Okay.
good point. If not for that, then maybe for something else. But good question. I know that we have just about 2 minutes left. So I appreciate you all, and thank you for like kind of sticking through to the end of this with me. I know it's dry and not too exciting, but if you ever need any help with anything, questions like this, resetting your password, if you need anything, if you have data that you're like, oh my God, Asia, I swear I just filled this out and I have no idea where it is, where the touch point is, contact me, let me know. It's okay, we'll figure it out. Just thank you for being here. And I hope that you got a little bit something out of it.
Thank you.
All right, so I hope you all have a good day. If I don't hear from you, I hope it's okay, and just have a nice rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Also, I just dropped
You too.
the eval link in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much, Asia. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I go ahead and?
I think it's safe to do